Welcome to the Church Office podcast. My name's Gavin, and it's a thrill to talk to Dave Taylor this morning in Sydney. Mate, I've got up early this morning to have a chat to you.
Mate, I haven't got up early for this at all, but thanks for doing that.
Well, you're in the middle of lockdown still, aren't you? Which is
mate. There's no point in getting up early for lockdown, is it? Sometimes Emma will say we should get on and do something else, and I'm like, what?
What are we going to do?
What are we rushing back to? Lockdown life.
Yeah, it's true. And Dave and I used to work together in Christchurch before Dave went off to church plant in Sydney. So, mate, tell us a little bit about your story and your journey to get there.
Oh my, let's go back some time now. In fact, I was thinking on the way here, Gav, to do this. I've had a quarter of my life now in Australia. I was 35 when we moved here. 46 this coming year. Is crazy. I went to Christchurch from when I was 18. When I moved to go to university, I joined Christchurch, fell in love with it, what you stand for as a local church, and planned to be there all my life. I ended up becoming a pastor there in 2001, I think, after going to the pastor's college in 2000. Right. And was a pastor in your church for 10 years. So you are my roots by a long way. But really felt the Lord calling us into Australia through a long series of events. We actually had an intern at Christchurch many years ago from Australia, and he was looking to plant into Australia and wanted help and to really work out whether he should do that, and if so, how to do it. And during that year, it became clear that he's big-hearted, loves the Lord, wants a church planted in Sydney, but may not be the right guy to go plant into Sydney. And we all came to that same place. And at the same time, the Lord really put on my heart and Emma's heart that maybe he was calling us to that. So it's a long story that I won't bore you with, but the Lord really called us here. And so we moved out here in 2010 and have lived here ever since.
I love it, mate. It's a big deal. Take your family right across the other side of the world on a church.
Yeah, I thought it was at the time. I thought it was a big deal, and now I realise it was a really big deal.
Yeah, it's a massive.
Yeah, it was
huge sacrifice for you, but it's good. And so the church has grown from what you had a small core team initially to start with. What were your numbers?
Yeah. Look, to start off with, I thought I had a reducing ministry, Gav. I think we started with about 35 people. I think that had shown interest over different times. Yeah. Everybody saying they love Sovereign Grace. It was like, oh, sweet. So we pulled them together as a group. I think within a year, that group was down to about 10.
Yeah.
I managed to put enough people off what we were about, and they didn't want to do it anymore. But now I'm not quite sure how I think now we're about 250, 280, something like that. We planted another church 2 years ago in another area in Sydney.
Great.
They're running at about 80, 90 people, I think. And we're actually looking at another plant just at the moment and asking questions about that. So, yeah, the Lord is kind.
It's keeping you busy, mate, which is great. Dave, we're talking about church administration, pastor's perspective. And we started off the series with talking to Pete Greasley, Pete, and worked with Pete for years and years.
Very well.
Now, we're going to a totally different context and looking forward to what we can sort of learn from you. Tell us a bit about your team and how you've developed it, because I know you value church administration and church management as much as I do and as Pete. Tell us a bit about your team and how you kind of started off and how you've built, because you can't have somebody in a full-time position in church administration straight off a church plant. It doesn't work.
If only.
Yeah.
If only we could, that would be great. But no, we couldn't do that here in Sydney. When I moved to Sydney, I was full-time.
Yeah.
And I was the only paid full-time employee. Right from the off, I worked hard to try and build a core team. So build a leadership team, if you will, in that first 6 months that could carry different spheres of church life. So whether that be kids ministry or youth, or looking after care groups, that type of thing, actually running care groups, and administration. So I was looking very quickly for unpaid positions, but people that really felt the call of God on them with those gifts. Yeah. I think the Lord does equip people in church life, whether we're talking about paid or not paid, it's a bit regardless. But I think the Lord gives us gifts. And so a big part of my job very quickly was pulling together the right gifts. And so we actually started with a core team of about 5 people, I think, if I recall. Our first time we hired somebody was an administrator. Mm-hmm. There was a lady that actually felt that the Lord had put on her heart to give us a day a week for free. She just wanted to serve the church. I think her actual words were, "I can see you drowning in administration."
Oh, that's nice.
And I want you to be able to do other things in church life.
Yeah.
And she was right. I mean, I was happy to do the administration. I think that's part of what you're called to do, particularly when you go plant a church.
Yeah.
But it's not like I crave to try and keep this. And so she came in and did that a day a week. It didn't take long before we were actually able to hire her for 2 days, and which is what she then started doing, which was such a blessing.
Yeah, that's really
And
helpful.
then we, over time, just kept growing the team. So we eventually took on another pastor and then another pastor after that. And now we have an administrator and a bookkeeper, all that type of stuff. And so, yeah, different roles get in at different times. But we still have a lot of lay people serving in numerous roles in ministry, and are constantly training people to that end and trying to develop people to be deployed. And whether that be pastoral ministry, leadership ministry, administration ministry, church planting, whatever it be, we want to try and equip the saints for works of ministry as best we can.
Mate, that's great. I love that. And I love the fact that you place huge value in it. So the core team that you've got, they're doing kids ministry, youth work. Those are, in Wales here, typical roles that people hire next. They don't go for a church administrator. They go straight into something, kind of intern responsible for youth work or kids ministry. But don't go administration. And is there anything that you could encourage, people just to rethink that over here in the UK?
Well, look, I think the reality is everywhere. I mean, affordability usually makes it very difficult to employ lots of people very quickly. Yeah. I think administration, I would just argue if you're doing pastoral ministry well and you're building a team well, it's probably the backfilling of administration you're going to need more than somebody else to be a pastor alongside you, because that's going to leave you doing the administration still. Yeah. I think that administration piece is more of a deaconing role in many ways. And so I think the sooner you can hire somebody to be doing that, I'm not even necessarily saying full-time, but part-time or hours or evenings or whatever it be, to offload. So first time we took on a bookkeeper here, and we just took her on for 4 hours a week. Yeah. And she actually does it in her own time. She fits it in around the week, and I don't really mind. But that's what she does. And so I'm a big fan of employing staff to do administrative roles. I think it helps pastors to really do the work of ministry, to get on with moving the church forward for the glory of the Lord.
Yeah, that priority to be able to go and do other things is so important, isn't it? We talk to pastors here who are drowning in that kind of administration, so they're thinking about GDPR, risk assessments for COVID, and you just don't want to do this kind of stuff, do you?
No, rostering and a rotoring, as you say in the UK. There's just so many different jobs that you think you're a very well-paid rotorer. It's just like, I don't think this is the best use of your experience and time. Not when you think biblically we're primarily given to prayer, the preaching of God's word, the sacraments, equipping the saints. I think administration is wonderfully, wonderfully needed. But the sooner that can be passed on and handed on. I think when I worked with you, Gav, for many years, we just worked so closely together. And I think it trebles your ministry. It doesn't just double it. You get so much more done by working together on these things.
No, that's absolutely true. I do love that. And Dave, you're talking about core team. You're thinking about people's gifting. You're interacting with people in the church. You're saying, I feel a sense that I can, call to do this. I can serve the church in that. How are you, balancing all these things? How are you sort of training people? One of the conversations we're having in our church now is, how do we do this for the next generation? How are we going to pass on this ministry to the next generation? How are you doing that? How are you identifying people? How are you giving room for people to do that and exploring those different ministries, those different gifts?
Yeah, probably a few different ways. I mean, we're all trying to, I think all our pastors and all our leaders, we're trying to build in a mentality of discipleship. Mm-hmm. And so really, who are you discipling? So if you're running kids ministry, who are you discipling? Mm-hmm. If you're running youth ministry, who are you discipling? Whatever the role is, you fill in the blank. I run personally something called Leadership Boot Camp, which I do for men and women once a month. It's a year-long course, and they read a ton of stuff. And then we come together and we discuss it. I think I've got 18 people on that at the moment, men and women, who are thinking about being trained for various different things. Some of them may feel a call of God for pastoral ministry. Some of them may just want to be like, hey, I just want to be a better leader in my workplace. For others, it might be like when Christina came on it, it was more that I'd really love to see us grow in mercy ministries. And I wonder how to maybe develop a ministry like that. So it's like, sweet, let's come on board. Let's train you in those big building blocks of what it looks like to lead something and move forward. So we do that. I think just generally as well, we try and build in an attitude in the church of let's have a go. So if you want to serve in something, well, welcome aboard. Let's get it done. And if there's something you're desperate to see happen and it's not actually in the church, it might be because you're meant to be doing it in our church. And that's why God's brought you to us. So let's see if we can, let's talk about that, but very disposed to wanting to move forward. And I generally believe that if the Lord's calling us to come together as a local church with different gifts and abilities, a big part of my role and the pastoral role in my mind is equipping the saints for those works of ministry. So how can I train you? How can I deploy you? And how can we use you to help us be an even better body and a representation of Jesus Christ here in the church and in our community?
Yeah. And what you're pointing to there, Dave, is a culture, isn't it, that you're creating, isn't it? I love the fact you've got a leadership program that leadership's required across every different kind of ministry, isn't it? And, and for individuals in their own lives, in their marriages, in their families, So I love the fact that you're equipping people there, and then this culture that you're building, and I've seen it from the cheap seats to see what you're doing, the way that you kind of invest into people and relationships is that actually you get to know people and where that sense of where God's calling them and where you can position them to play their part. And once people have found that part, there's a real joy in it, isn't it? You must see that where you've deployed someone to a role and suddenly that ministry's just flourished.
Oh, it's wonderful. I think that's for me personally, that's probably my happy place. Yeah. When somebody's feeling a stirring of the Lord, wants to be used in a certain way, I'm already disposed, unless there's clanging character issues, or a bit like the X Factor, they think they're really good, but they're actually not. That's more of a problem. But assuming that, hey, they may well be good at this and they're a person of character, let's try and help them. Let's try and help them make this happen. And it's very rewarding when then the Lord really does bless the labors of their hands. And you think, praise the Lord for that. We're a better church and the fruit of seeing that gift deployed than we would have been if we hadn't found a pathway for them. Yeah. So yes, I think that's incredibly rewarding when that happens, and certainly makes me happy.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. Yeah, it's brilliant. Dave, tell us, what are some of the tools that you're using? Like, what are some of the resources that you're using to that underpins everything that you're doing and you're building?
Yeah. This is one of those things that I'm sure, as you experience still at Christchurch, Gav, we do reassess at different times, because there is a bit of tool creep over time where you realize the tool was working for you once upon a time and it's not working anymore. I remember when, for one season in our church life, we're realizing when we're communicating with the church, it might be on Facebook or it might be WhatsApp, or they might get an email or they might hear it on a Sunday. And you're like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. So we're constantly trying to streamline what we're trying to use and what we're trying to do, because so much of what we're trying to do is communication. Yeah. So the more voices in the midst, the more complicated it becomes pretty quickly. A couple of tools we use, though, Elvanto would be one of them. Okay. Yeah. So Elvanto, we pretty much run the church through Elvanto. So everybody in the church has an app, and everybody's getting their rotas through their access to people's numbers if they need them, if they're running teams, so on and so forth. So that's kind of how we run our sort of structural life as a church. And we use Todoist as a leadership team. Yeah. Use that quite a lot. So that's how we run our different teams and drop things in to different people. Google Drive we use a lot. We keep that a lot of stuff online where different teams then access it and can go ahead and obviously change it, so on and so forth. Zoom is pretty much how we run our church right now because we're on lockdown. Yeah. Zoom, look, we did do YouTube for a while, but that didn't work too great because it was a bit one-dimensional. But YouTube, at least you can really you can talk to people. It feels like you're actually together, and there's a degree of accountability and so forth. A big part of our communication piece is our blog.
Okay.
So we have a church blog that we run, and then on a Tuesday and a Friday, MailChimp scoops the new blogs and puts them in people's email box.
Okay.
And so that would be some of the tools we use. We found, I mean, we've got to a size that, as many churches do very quickly, where you can't just work with paper and pen and even Word doc and tables. It's like you're going to be there a long time.
Yeah.
So having stuff online has been really helpful for us, and then structuring things that way. So yeah, Elvanto, Todoist, Zoom, Google Drive, blogs, they tend to be our main sources that we try and use.
Yeah, communication is a massive deal, isn't it, for any church, any size?
Yes, it is. Yeah. I mean, just going back to one thing you said earlier on about the importance of an administrator early on.
Yeah.
Just one point on that is when we built the core team, so we had different guys, they were all also using the administrator.
Okay.
And I think that's an important part of the puzzle in that sense of, so Janelle, who took on our kids ministry and was an assistant principal in a school, wonderful, but didn't have the time to be photocopying all the materials and passing that out to everybody and structuring some of the things of when she didn't have that ability.
Yeah.
She could train, and even now she does it. She does it voluntarily, and we have nearly 100 people serving in kids ministry now. She does it on the side, but we also have an administrator that's doing all the stuff for her, that's doing the rostering, getting that intel out. So just to say that administration piece is so critical, because all the core team members all are talking to that person to get that blog out, or to get that roster, or can you get this ready for me? It's probably how we're able to push on with lay people so much, because that administrator is doing the time. Yeah,
that's a good point, isn't it? Yeah, in the background they are making things happen, I guess, which is a big part.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think in our context, I think some of the people on the core team probably couldn't serve on it if we didn't have somebody doing it. They would struggle because they're working jobs themselves. They can't do both. But if somebody else could do the admin side, they can do the leadership side.
They can do that side of it, and that's interesting. Yeah,
which is great. Which is what I want.
Yeah. So the communication stuff like that. Have you ever appointed a communications officer, or have you left that with the church administrator to kind of coordinate? Because there's a lot of things there, isn't there? Your blogs and keeping all those things up to date. It's a big thing of the week.
Yes, there is. I mean, that question takes me back to once a year we go away as a core team. And in our core team, there's like about 14 people, so it's quite big. And we go away, and we had this conversation about 3 years ago, as in, hey guys, there's a lot of communication over numerous different formats and what we're going to do. So we don't have somebody that is head of communication, but we do have a lot of clarity on what we communicate where and who does that. So we actually shut down our social media. We don't do hardly anything on social media anymore. WhatsApp, we really try and keep that just for very simple instructions to leaders. We really run everything through the blog.
Okay.
And that saved us a massive headache. So rather than people hearing different things from different places potentially, everything's going through the blog. So we had to train the church that you got to read the blog, because if you don't read the blog, you're going to know like 10% that's going on in the church. You won't know the rest. And over time, that the pennies dropped on that, and that's helped us with our communication piece massively.
Yeah.
Everybody knows, that's where I'm going to get my intel.
Yeah.
I don't know how what we found is even trying to produce things on the website per se, people don't read it.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not, and even the calendar, church calendar on the website, great, no one goes there. So it's like, this doesn't work. One other thing we did do on the calendar, which helped us, is we set up a Google calendar.
Okay.
For different teams. And so if you log on to that and you want to download that, you can just get it all everybody can just get it to their phone.
Yeah.
So you can know 2022 straight away on your phone if you're involved in youth or young adults or whatever. And that's been really helpful.
Yeah.
So people don't say, I didn't know it was on. They do know it's on because it's actually in their diary. And so that's been helpful. Yeah. So we really do try and mainstream our stuff.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? And I love the fact that it's just not just one person who knows how to do the tools and use the tools, but the whole team does, isn't it? And that's an important point, I think. Dave, you talked about church planting, and you talked about different things that you're doing. What kind of role has the church administrator, your church, had in supporting you to move forward? Because in some ways you're going to repeat the model that you've already got in another location, I guess. And so So how is there time that you're giving him to support you to do some of these church plans? What does that role look like?
Yeah, good question. Well, I have two. So I have a church administrator here who's a lady.
Yeah.
Who does a wonderful job. She operates more in sort of admin assistance, really, but she does do all our rostering and the main running of our mainframe stuff as a church.
Yeah.
And then I have a guy who works with me, Andrew, who works with me for all my emerging nations stuff, but that would include all of the Australia stuff.
Yeah.
So he would be involved in that. At the same time, when we took on pastors, we almost built in to some of that pastoral time, they have a sphere and they have a sphere of administration in it. Okay. So they kind of own it. So I don't really have the monopoly over all the administration per se. There's built-in administration to other people's roles. But you are right. People tend to recreate themselves. So when we sent out a planter to Parramatta in September 2019, his first hire was actually somebody for administration. So they have somebody now who does administration for a day a week and then an intern for a day a week. We often use interns as well for those types. It's a good way of learning the ministry. Start off with some administration as well. It's like, well, get involved. You're going to learn about how the church works. You're going to find out things you didn't know. So get stuck in. And so,
Yeah, that's good. And you're talking about emerging nations. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing on that, mate, because I love seeing Dave's over here. He's in the Philippines and then he's somewhere else. And
well, I'm not anywhere at the minute. I'm in my house.
You're locked down at the minute.
Oh, mate, I think there's two places in the world that you are not allowed to leave your country. I think Australia and North Korea. I think that's about the only two countries where you're not allowed out at the moment. Yeah, Emerging Nations is basically just an arm of Sovereign Grace churches. So I work with 38 countries outside the States. I do work in the States, but I'm not responsible for the United States. But they're just countries where we have work going on either with planting or church adoptions. That's busy. Now, again, there's a lot of administration with that, Gav, obviously, because there's financial pieces with that, there's ordination pieces with that. So I don't do that by myself. So people are like, that's ridiculous. You can't do 38 countries. And it's like, well, no, of course I can't. That's why there's 22 people that work for me. So there's 22 people that work on that. And then I have an executive assistant that just does that with me down in Australia, which is great. Otherwise, you couldn't possibly do it.
No, you couldn't do. And so the work internationally is busy. And are you balancing that with the church time as well? Are you supported Sovereign Grace on the 2 days or a certain?
So I work 2 days a week for Sovereign Grace and 3 days a week for Sovereign Grace Church Sydney. They're both Sovereign Grace, I suppose. So one's global and one's it's about 40% I do globally, 60% I do locally, which is actually okay, and that's been doable so far. So good.
There's something great for the church about that, isn't it? Of being able to get a front row seat of what God's doing across the nations through the partnership that you're working with Sovereign Grace. I remember when Pete used to go and travel and used to hear the stories and the gospel being into new nations. That combination must be lovely for the church.
Oh, brother, it's really wonderful. I think that there's the joy of partnership and the joy of our Great Commission of taking the gospel to the nations is you just can't do it by yourselves. I mean, we're just a small church in Sydney. We can't reach the nations by ourselves. But when you're a part of something where there is a lot of nations work, that is a lot of fun. We actually have an incredibly international church too. There's about 32 nationalities in our church. And so it's always a blessing when my work is often in places that I have somebody in the church, they're from there. So that's been a lot of fun. Even translating, we're doing a lot of translating work at the moment. Our statement of faith into different languages and the website into different languages. And it's fun when you're able to send like the Latinos, here's our website now in Spanish for you. And they're super excited about it. And they're reading stuff they didn't know about before. That's been a lot of fun, particularly when you're dealing with people in your local church where their first language is they're from abroad. It's been a real blessing.
Oh, mate, I love that. So what's the plan after you get out of lockdown? I mean, any guidance from the government about when you can and when?
Mate, at the speed this is happening, I think by the time we get out, I might be retiring. I'm not sure. Not sure. I said to the kids the other day, I said, by the time we get back to church, some of you are going to be married with kids. It's going to be an interesting arrival back into the place. I don't know. We're just waiting. Yeah. I think the government, they are rolling the vaccines out, which is good.
Yeah.
So I think by middle of November, if I recall, everybody that wants to be vaccinated can.
Okay.
So I think it's not going to be long, but it is just a rough few months prior to getting there. Once we get back to it, we want to carry on. We're trying to build a pastor's college here or some type of college, which is going to be for Asia, actually, and for here in the Philippines and India and Nepal and all those countries. That was in the plan for 2019.
Yeah.
But here we are, 2021, and still haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
But that'll be the plan. There's another church plant that we're looking at in Canberra, which is our capital city here in Australia. And there's two potential adoptions in Newcastle, which is another city near us. So they'll be explored more. All those trips have just been cancelled because we're not allowed to leave our suburbs, really.
Yeah.
So there's things, it's going to be busy when we get out. So I want to enjoy this season as best we can. It's different. Yeah. Wouldn't wish it on anybody. Your season was incredibly longer than ours.
Yeah,
it was long, but I trust it will be a light of momentary trouble in light of eternity. So trying to seize the moment.
Right. And mate, just to finish, you've got a podcast running, and you've got a new podcast running.
Yeah,
Tell us about
my friend convinced me.
Let's do a little promo for that.
well, my friend Riley Spring, who's the lead pastor of Sovereign Grace Church of Parramatta, convinced me we should do a podcast called Grace in the Adventure of Leadership, because there's not a lot of people speaking into that in an Australian context.
Okay.
And there's a lot of people speaking to it from an American context, but Australians are not always going to listen to American podcasts.
Okay.
So we decided to start an Australian podcast speaking into leadership in an Australian context. And it's been a lot of fun. So people are hitting on it. I'm surprised. I thought we'd have like 3, my mum, his mum, my sister or something. Yeah. No, we've had quite a lot more than that. And I trust the Lord uses it. And if he doesn't, then we've had a bit of fun in the process. But the heart behind it was to try and how do we equip and care for pastors that are already pastors? And how do we equip and train guys that are maybe beyond us, that maybe haven't heard of us, but are actually looking to plant churches and want to get involved? So, it's a bit more of a voice into Australia.
I love that, mate. Thank you for connecting with us today, mate. It's good to see an old friend on, even if it is on Zoom.
See you too.
So good to see you, my friend, and hear all about it. I love what God's doing in you and through you, and all that the church means to us here. Sydney Church is just wonderful, mate. So
thanks, man. Well, give my love to everybody. We think about you very, very, very often and talk about you and Pete and the church there often. You still have a very, very special place in our heart. You always will. Yeah. So thanks for having me on.
Oh, mate, it's a pleasure. And if you've got any questions from anything you've heard today, then please contact us at questions@thechurchoffice.co.uk. We'd love to connect you today. Check out Dave's podcast. Look at Sovereign Grace Sydney. Go and visit their site. Go and read their blog and find out all that's happening.
What's happening next week.
And there's loads to learn from you, mate. And I know. I love visiting church websites and getting a picture of what other people are doing. You can learn a lot. So want to encourage people in that. And if you're involved in church administration and you're listening to this, then be encouraged that you are playing a vital role in ministry to support ministry. And that may not be recognized in your church. You may not experience the same kind of encouragement that maybe we do and Dave's staff, but know God's our favor and blessing towards you and what you're doing. So, mate, goodbye. Thank you very much for that.